Herkese merhaba. Listening Speaking videolarının bu bölümü özellikle pilot olmak isteyenleri ilgilendiriyor. Aklı havada olanlar bu videoyu dikkatle izlesinler. Türk Hava Yolları'nda pilot olabilmek için sırasıyla hangi sınavlara girmek gerekiyor? Bu sınavlarda nelere dikkat etmeli? Ve İngilizce mülakat kısmını geçebilmek için püf noktalar nelerdir? Tüm bu soruların cevaplarını bu videoda bulacaksınız. Ben bu konularda bilgi sahibi değilim. En azından değildim. Bu yüzden bir bilene danıştım. Bir bilen Sofia isminde bir Cambly eğitmeni. Yabancı ile konuşturan uygulamaları tanıttığım ilk videomda paylaştığım referans kodumla üye olarak hem kendinize hem de bana kazandırdığınız 15 dakikalık hediye görüşme sürelerim bugün itibariyle 9000 dakikaya ulaştı. Ben de bu dakikalar sayesinde Sofia ile doyurucu bir görüşme yapabildim. Sofia özellikle bu alana yoğunlaşmış bir eğitmen. Bu sayede gerek sınav prosedürleri, gerekse çıkmış ve çıkabilecek sorular hakkında engin bir tecrübeye sahip. Hatta daha önce THY sınavına girip kazanmış olan öğrencilerinin cevaplarını disiplinli bir şekilde arşivlemiş ve yeni öğrencilerin de bu kazandıran cevaplar ışığında eğitiyor. Sofia ile görüşmemizi Türkçe veya İngilizce altyazıyla izleyebilirsiniz. İkisi aynı anda olmuyor. Duy sesimizi YouTube. Şimdi sözü daha fazla uzatmadan görüşmemize geçelim. I need you to give some brief information about the types of exams of the Turkish Airlines. Let's say I want to be a pilot. What are the exams that I have to take to be a pilot in the Turkish Airlines, and how should I prepare for them?
The first thing that Turkish Airlines requires from any student that wants to be a pilot is that you have to take the IELTS exam in English. Turkish Airlines expects an overall score of 6 in order to be able to even apply for the first step, which is DLR1. You can do either TOEFL or IELTS.
Okay.
So as long as you achieve the the score that they require either in TOEFL or IELTS, that's perfectly acceptable by Turkish Airlines. Once you have passed the DLR1, then you qualify to have the CRM interview. If you successfully pass the CRM, which stands for Crew Resource Management, then the Human Resources interview, which is also known as the board interview.
Okay, I see. So is this CRM exam in Turkish or in English?
Okay, it used to be in English up until February 2016, and then when the University of Istanbul became involved, they changed the requirement from speaking the CRM interview in English to doing it in Turkish. And then with the board interview or the human resources interview, that is in English. What we normally do to prepare students for both these is that there are about 113 important questions that are flying around. Many students have copies of these. Well, I've selected the most important questions from there, and we go over these questions with each student. And I will give the students, for example, I want you to prepare number 1, number 2, number 3, number 5, number 10, number 12, number 24. And then, because those are, from my experience, the most important questions that are asked in the interview. And what I also do is I will make recommendations. Like, for example, I will say to the student, question 1 is, why do you want to be a pilot? Okay. And so I will hear what they have to say in response, and then I will make recommendations. I want my students to be different from all the other candidates. I don't want them, for example, to use cliches in English. For example, one of the cliches is, it's been my dream. I've had this dream since I was a child.
Mhm.
Or, when asked by the interviewer, what is special about, being in an aircraft, and they will say, I would love to have an office in the sky.
Okay.
So those are things I don't want my students to say. We will go through all the required questions that I've selected that I know are being used by
Mhm.
both the CRM interview and the human resources interview.
Okay.
And then once we've completed them, like, why do you want to be a pilot? How did you decide to become a pilot? What characteristics do you have that you feel would be very valuable for Turkish Airlines,
Mhm.
so that you can be in the cockpit?
Mhm.
These are questions that I support my candidates with, and we go over potential things that they can say.
So could you give us some spoilers?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, of course. Okay. So, for example, it's very easy to answer why you want to be a pilot. And so it's very important for the students to say that I researched the requirements for applying for Turkish Airlines, and I also was able to speak to other people who work for Turkish Airlines, and then I gathered information on an airline pilot's life. I also looked at the positive aspects of being a pilot and the negative aspects, and then I was fully convinced
Okay.
that I wanted to be a pilot.
So they understand that, well, this person has made his or her research, so he
Correct.
knows all the negative sides and the positive sides, let's say pros and cons of being a pilot. So
Yes.
he is the man or she is the woman for the job, right?
Yes, because I've had a lot of women that have applied to be pilots and that they've been successful, and they're now in Turkish Airlines Pilot Academy in Aydın. What is also really a lot of fun is that we simulate the interviews. So then a candidate would pretend that we are doing the interview.
Okay.
And so we simulate.
Yes.
We simulate the entire experience.
Okay.
And
Great.
these simulations are taken from the questions, almost like a transcript from my successful students who have passed those interviews. So we simulate them, and I will say to them, okay, today we're going to do Ozan's interview for CRM, or we'll do Burçin's interview for her human resources, and they were successful. Another thing that if they want to be pilots, one thing that they have to know as candidates is that air traffic control, ATC, is internationally English. We want them to speak with clarity, clearly, so that when they do communicate with air traffic control, and we also go over the aviation terms in English so that students will be familiar with them. When you want to pass the CRM, the University of Istanbul sends you 12 questions that you need to answer and then send that in before your exam. I'd like to share some of the questions that were asked for the CRM interview. And this was asked to my student called Mehmet. I'm happy to tell you that he passed his CRM and the HR interview. So the first question they asked Mehmet was, what are you doing now? What profession are you in? They asked him also, what skills have you improved on in your present position? why do you want to leave your job? Surely you have a good job, you are earning a good salary. Why do you want to leave your job and come and work for Turkish Airlines?
That's a very important question. You know.
That is a paramount question, because they have to be convinced that you have a love for flying, not a love for money. Okay, then how did you decide to become a pilot? Was it sudden? Can you give me an important example of a time where you had to make an immediate decision? And then they asked Mehmet, what kind of people do you have difficulties working with? Well, let's imagine that you are working with someone in Turkish Airlines that is disrespectful, hard to deal with, stubborn. How are you going to handle that situation? And the answer would be that they try to remain professional at all times and separate what is personal and what is professional. To continue, they asked some technical questions to the candidates on what are the braking systems in the aircraft. One question they asked him was, what are pilots doing to handle the language barriers?
Yeah, what's the answer to this one?
There is a method that's called readback, and it's a good method or tactic of actually repeating what that person has just said. And it's also, there's another method called hearback, which also helps you to understand what that other person is saying. Sometimes they will ask at CRM, what are the latest incidents in aviation? They sometimes ask questions like, what was the latest air crash? They'd like to know what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses.
Yeah, the typical two questions. Well, from what you said so far, I understand that in order to be a pilot, you really have to want to be a pilot. You know, you have to have some brief information about the airplane, the technical issues, and also you have to be monitoring the latest events in aviation. So if you are doing this, if you want to do this for money, well, maybe you should just go ahead and choose some other job, right?
Absolutely, yes. They want you to have researched many things about Turkish Airlines itself. So it's important for you to know what's the size of the fleet, how many Boeings they have, how many Airbuses, a little bit about the kinds of aircraft, because they will also ask you some technical questions. Tell us about your real flight experience. And then, what have you learned about aviation? And then they will start on, for example, they asked Girk, what is de-icing? And also, what things can happen if the plane is not de-iced?
Well, I can answer that question. Can I answer that question? Okay, I watched in in that TV show. Well, they de-iced a plane a bit earlier than usual, like let's say 10 minutes or something, and its takeoff just got delayed because of other plane. So since that procedure was applied before, the wings started icing again, and the plane crashed just because of that. So that's the importance of de-icing. Thank you.
It is. And also, as you said very correctly, that de-icing has to take place at the appropriate time just before takeoff.
Oh my God, I can be a pilot. I can take that exam.
And then the questions, how did you decide to become a pilot? And then how would your friends describe you? that is something that has often come up. How do your co-workers describe you?
So do they want the right answer or the correct answer?
They want the honest answer.
Okay.
They will also give you scenarios. For example, you're approaching a runway, there is fog and no visibility, and you say to the captain, "We cannot land." And he says to you, "Well, I've done this many times before. You suggest landing at another airport, but he insists against the rules."
Okay.
And so the first officer would actually take over controls of the aircraft and take on the role of captain flying. And another question could be, what is turbulence? What causes turbulence? What kinds of turbulence are there? What are flight control surfaces? How do they work? Tell us a little bit about how a jet engine works.
Yes.
Basic technical knowledge. They're not asking questions that are difficult for prospective flight candidates to answer, but it does show their interest in aviation and that they've researched these things.
Verdiği bu altın değerindeki bilgilerden ötürü Sofia'ya teşekkür ediyorum. Umarım bu bilgiler sınava ve sürece yönelik olarak bir nebze de olsa ışık tutabilmiştir. Eğer öyle olduğunu düşünüyorsanız beğen tuşuna tıklayabilirsiniz. Sofia'dan kendiniz ders almak isterseniz profil linkini bu videonun açıklamalar kısmına ekleyeceğim. Programı şu an için müsait, ancak bu videodan sonra nasıl bir hale gelir onu bilemiyorum. Bu yüzden acele etmenizde fayda var. Hoşça kalın.